Good morning. I'm Reverend Ed Brock, and I am delighted to be with you this morning as we gather together for worship and for celebration of this community and all it has been through the years and is now to all of us. In these days in which our lives are disrupted, our futures uncertain, in which fear sees us in the night or in the day, may we gather around the light, symbolized by our chalice flame, an ancient symbol of human hope and aspiration. May this light remind us that we are able to see what is good and true, and may its heat remind us of human warmth and kindness. So let there be light in each heart and mind, in all those gathered here, and in the hearts and minds of our loved ones, both near and far away. Thank you for your presence here today. The turmoil and even chaos that is in our society and about which we hear daily gives us a sense that life is out of control, certainly out of our individual control. And we are apt to feel disoriented, uncertain, and perhaps even lost. And we wonder what effect we can have on a world of pain and suffering and even chaos. But we must never lose faith that what we do and who we are and how we treat one another and what we hope for the world really matters. Today I'll be talking about the sacred dimension of relationships. Centuries ago, a writer named Lao Tzu wrote a statement that has endured through the centuries, and it draws a connection between the peace we have within us and the peace we have among us and between us and the peace of the world. We live in frightening times, but we must not succumb to fear. We must take refuge in what grounds us and guides us as we walk these perilous days. And it is in this spirit that I share this reading with you. Our society will one day, hopefully soon, return to a greater, higher level of decency and hope than it has now. And all of us are a part of making that happen. Let us join together as one in that great effort. For this week and next, I will be speaking about the sacred dimension of relationships. Let me begin by saying that the central drama of life, as I understand it, is to be a self in relationship to other selves. And to be a self doesn't mean simply to exist biologically or physically. But to be a self means that one has an inner compass based on one's core principles, values, what is truly important to oneself, and by which one navigates the challenges and changes of life. And yet, at the same time, we are always in relationship to other persons. And for me, what is meant by the sacred dimension of life and the sacred dimension of relationships is being a self, being one's genuine self, and at the same time, doing so in such a way that the other person can also flourish. The other person can also live by their core principles. The central drama in life, as I understand it, is to be this authentic, true self in relationship to others. It is a dance in which we are continually changing and moving. And of course, our relationships range from our relationship to teenage daughters, to elderly parents, to colleagues. So relationships are many and quite different. But in all of them, we are trying to do the same thing, be one's genuine self in relationship to other people who are also striving in their own way to be a genuine self. However, we are not just in relationship to other human beings, but we are in relationship to society, to its culture, to its institution. And most of all, we are continually in relationship to nature. It is our relationship to nature which sustains us. So life itself is never a solitary matter, but we are continually immersed in networks of relationships. And the question is, how do we manage to be harmonious in those relationships? I do not think that human beings have really begun to understand what is required and what is essential to do this dance of harmony in which one is a self and others can be their genuine self, and we live in peace with nature and with life around us. And there have been people down through the ages who have come and have taught us or tried to teach us that path of the sacred dance. I think Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and the Dalai Lama are three among many, many others who have tried to teach us to do that dance. However, the world in which we actually live is a world of disharmony, even chaos. And in fact, it's not just chaos, but violence, conflict, and strife that we see and experience around us. And not just between us and human beings. We are all well aware through the Black Lives Matter movement and through many of the wonderful prophets who have talked about the white supremacy ideology. We have learned through these great teachers of the many ways in which there is strife between members of the human family. However, there's also great disruption between ourselves and our relationship to nature. This last few weeks, there have been horrific fires in California. I have a visceral sense of life out there amid fires because I lived there for several years. And the governor of that state this week said the problem that we are facing is due to climate change. And what he was indicating is something that we all know. We live in a time in which we have become increasingly aware that the relationship between human beings and nature has been so disrupted for so long that it's led to catastrophic species death. And it's led to a change in our weather patterns and the climate itself, so that this will be felt for generations. And given the fact that disharmony and violence and disruption is the norm which we see and hear and feel every day, the question arises, how can we make our way out of this reality of strife and chaos and one group against the other toward a place of harmony? And I believe that is one of the central tasks of religious communities. I'd like to share with you 3 resources. One is an experience I had with a congregation that was quite peaceful. The second is a resource from a religious tradition, and the third resource is a universal adage known by all. And each of them speak to this question of how do we live harmoniously. And then I would like to conclude with drawing conclusions from those 3 resources. A number of years I found myself in one of the most peaceful Unitarian Universalist congregations I had ever experienced. It surprised me. You may be shocked to hear, but sometimes there's conflict in UU congregations and other congregations that are religious. And I knew about many congregations in their history vicariously through listening to friends and colleagues. And I myself had experienced life in at least 8 different congregations, so I was very familiar with the different levels of harmony and disharmony in congregations. And I came to this congregation and I was rather surprised at the level of harmony that prevailed. They got a lot of things done, but they had a lot of harmony in that congregation. And I took about 6 months to try to struggle with figuring out why. And here's some things that I concluded. First of all, in this congregation, the minister and the board president and the board saw each other as part of a team. They worked together to try to define together what is the greatest good of this congregation. The second thing that was unique about that congregation is they took their covenant very seriously. If you walked into the main entrance to their building, you would see on the left side a statement of the principles and purposes, and on the other side, their congregational covenant. If you then walked out of that foyer into their sanctuary, you would see, the very first thing, you would see a big framed citation of what their covenant was. The people in that congregation, I learned, view the life in that congregation like an adventure and an experiment. They are trying to see if they can lead their lives in accord with this agreement they've come to how they will be with one another. And they were sophisticated enough to understand there is no theological or ecclesiastical unity that gives us a sense of unity, and it is by covenants and our common agreements that we find unity. So that I found impressive. Another characteristic that was interesting was that they made a concerted effort, and it was a part of their culture, really, to always try to talk directly to people. Never go to a third person to talk about something that is between you and another person, but go to that person with whom you have a disagreement or misunderstanding and talk directly to them. And because their environment was calm, people could do this with a relatively high degree of ease. Now, the fourth characteristic is unique. I've never seen it at any other UU congregation, nor have I ever heard about such a thing at such a level at any other congregation, and that is they had a phenomenal men's movement group program. About 15 years ago, before I was there, I should say, there was a man in the congregation who was deeply moved by what was once called the men's movement. And he developed over 15 years a network of groups where men could go to talk about things that were on their mind, that they were struggling with, that they had difficulty with, some major transition. And so these groups were well developed with very good guidelines so that the people who were a part of these groups knew that there was a place they could go and say anything, unburden themselves in any way, and their trust would not be violated, and they would be supported. As you probably know, men are renowned for having difficulty with connection, particularly with other men, and men struggle with issues of trust and so forth, and it's very difficult for men to have deep relationships with one another, but this congregation did it, and it permeated that culture. So these four things were powerful influences on the life of the congregation. Now, a second resource I'd like to share with you comes from a religious tradition, because at some point I realized that one of the greatest functions of religious traditions over hundreds and hundreds of years has been to help people to learn how to be with one another in a peaceful way. And one finds teachings about relationship in all the great major religions. But there was one religious tradition that I found particularly interesting, and that was the teaching of the Buddhist tradition about what is called right relationships. Buddhist teachings are huge and vast, but there's one small part of the teaching that pertains to relationships. And here was the instructions of Buddha about relationships. Only speak what is factual and what is true. Never anything that is unfactual or untrue. Say what is only beneficial to a person's well-being. And if one has something to say, make sure it is agreeable and endearing. Interesting. Now, if one finds oneself needing to say something to another person that is neither endearing nor agreeable, then one should only say it if it is beneficial to that person's well-being, and always with a proper sense of timing. I find this teaching remarkable for its simplicity, precision, and utility. And finally, a third resource, something that is known by everyone and has been around since at least 500 BCE, and that is the Golden Rule. And it's interesting to note that there is some form of the Golden Rule in literally every major religious tradition of the world, and that the origin of the Golden Rule in these various traditions was made independently. So it's like human beings stumbled on a very good way to talk about relationships that was very, very simple. The Golden Rule is expressed positively and negatively. The positive form is treat others as you would like others to treat you. In a negative way, do not treat others in ways that you would not like to be treated. The Golden Rule is also remarkable because of its simplicity and brevity and universal applicability. I conclude my remarks with this. There is a common pattern in all of these diverse resources I mentioned today. And that common pattern is that these teachings and these examples encourage us to look upon our words as powerful instruments that can impact the life of another human being and our own, as well as other people. And rather than looking out toward others, it encourages us to look to ourselves and how we form our words and express ourselves to another. The secret of all of these teachings is not learning the best one, because they're all eminently useful. The challenge is in taking these thoughts and integrating it into our heart and our mind. And therein lies the challenge of religious communities and spiritual communities such as this one. I believe that all religious communities at heart, as one of their most basic functions, are all about practicing. Yes, learning, but it's easy to learn. Practicing, experimenting with the great principles that have come down to us that help us understand and navigate our relationship to others. It's about learning to speak with others in a way that is healing, life-giving, hopeful, and opens up the future to greater possibility and doesn't close it to an ever more narrow landscape. As the reading today during the opening words suggests, what we do here, what we do within ourselves, what we do among ourselves, affects the world around us. And what we start and do here goes out into the world. May we all be mindful of the power of our words. Amen. As we extinguish this chalice flame, may its light go out into every person here and to their loved ones, both near and far away. May its light become hope within us, illumination for understanding, and loving warmth within each of us toward each and all. I now share our words of benediction, which come to us from Joseph Cleveland, entitled, "May We Hear the Melody of Life." May we hear the melody of life and find ourselves singing harmony. May we be open to the dissonances in the song of the land and in the people, that we might be part of the world's urging toward justice, toward peace, toward loving kindness for all. May we feel in our bones the rhythms of life and land and find ourselves dancing. May we go in peace. Amen.